Okay, so imagine this. A letter lands on your desk,
Wait.
and the ink is all smudged. It's from a guy named John Adrian Velasquez, but he goes by JJ.
Oh, okay.
And he's writing to you from prison, claiming he's innocent. He's been convicted of murder, and it's 2012. He's been in prison for over a decade at this point. And get this, NBC just did a whole investigative report on his case, and you're suddenly right in the middle of this whole thing.
Wow.
You've got this raw emotion, this legal battle, and a system that, well, maybe isn't working the way it should. That's where we're starting our deep dive today.
Interesting.
We've got JJ's letters, we've got investigative reports, we even have firsthand accounts, and we're going to try to untangle this whole complicated case.
It's like a lot to unpack.
It is, and we're going to try and figure out how the pursuit of justice, can sometimes go so wrong.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these things can unfold. What strikes me right away is how much material we have to work with. We're not just talking about legal documents, we're talking about JJ's personal letters.
Right.
And they give us a real glimpse into his world, into his emotions. It's not something you see every day in these kinds of cases.
Exactly. And those letters really show the impact that NBC investigation had. On one hand, JJ's feeling hopeful. He starts getting letters from strangers, people who believe his story.
Right.
But then on the other hand, he's still stuck in prison, right? Still living with this wrongful conviction.
That's a tough situation.
Yeah, it really highlights this double-edged sword thing with media attention.
That's true.
It can shed light on things, But that doesn't always mean immediate freedom.
Right, right.
Yeah.
It can be a long and winding road. And for JJ, that road leads him to the Manhattan District Attorney's Conviction Integrity Unit.
The CIU.
Yeah, the CIU. It was created specifically to look into these possible wrongful convictions.
You'd think, having a unit like that would be a good thing.
You would.
Like the system trying to right its wrongs.
Yeah. Initially, there was a sense of optimism. JJ's legal team felt it too. But then, as we dug deeper, a big red flag popped up. Right in the first meeting between the CIU and JJ's lawyers, guess who's there?
Who?
The original trial prosecutor.
Seriously. That's not exactly a fresh perspective, is it? Wouldn't you want someone totally removed from the original case to take a look?
It does make you wonder about their commitment to finding the truth. It's like, are they really trying to uncover what happened or just solidify the original conviction?
And that doubt just grows when you look at the actual interview between JJ and the CIU.
Oh, right, right.
So they take JJ out of prison for the first time in 15 years. He even gets a glimpse of the streets of New York.
Oh.
But then the interview gets weird.
How so?
Well, the sources describe it as super tense,
Really?
like an interrogation, not an investigation. And they seem to focus less on the murder itself and more on JJ's past.
That's interesting. It's almost as if they were trying to discredit him personally instead of actually looking at the evidence of the crime.
Exactly. It felt more like they were trying to reinforce the existing narrative, you know? But then something huge happens. A woman from Seattle contacts JJ's lawyers.
Oh.
And she says she knows who really killed Al Ward.
No way. This is where it gets really interesting. The woman claims this guy named Mustafa confessed to her. And get this, Mustafa was the prime suspect before they even focused on JJ.
So the original suspect confesses.
Yeah.
And they have a witness.
That's what she's saying. She even claims Mustafa showed her the police sketch from back then, bragging about getting away with murder.
Wow. You'd think the CIU would jump all over that. A confession from the original suspect? That's huge.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But instead, they hesitate. It's all bureaucracy and excuses. JJ's lawyers are urging them, interview the witness, go to Seattle, do whatever it takes. They even suggest having her wear a wire to get Mustafa on tape.
It's like they're giving them a roadmap.
Exactly.
What do they do?
Delay. They delay and make excuses. And remember, JJ is still stuck in prison, clinging to this tiny sliver of hope.
It's almost like they weren't really interested in finding the truth.
It does make you wonder, so what do JJ's lawyers do? Do they just wait around?
What do they do?
They get fed up.
Yeah.
They book flights to Seattle themselves and interview the witness. And they're convinced she's telling the truth.
Yeah.
And guess what? They find another witness,
Another one.
a friend of the first, who also heard Mustafa confess.
So now there are two people saying the same thing. Both seem credible.
Right.
At this point, the CIU has to take it seriously, right?
Well, they do eventually fly both witnesses to New York for interviews, but from what we gather, those interviews were not exactly friendly. The witnesses felt attacked, doubted, even accused. Imagine that.
Like they were trying to shut them down. These women put themselves out there, potentially risking a lot, to help an innocent man, and they get treated like this.
It does raise some serious concerns about their methods, and it's not just coming from JJ's team. There's this renowned defense attorney, Ron Kuby, who represented the witnesses pro bono. He's also critical of how the CIU handled things. He calls their approach adversarial and their skepticism towards any new evidence troubling.
So it's not just JJ and his lawyers.
Right,
Even an experienced guy like Ron Kuby thinks something's off.
right.
But what about Mustafa himself? Did anyone actually talk to him about all of this?
Actually, our podcast host did.
Really?
They tracked him down in Seattle and confronted him directly.
Ooh, okay. And what happened? Did he deny everything?
He did deny it, but there were some inconsistencies in his story. For example, he has a very distinct accent, something none of the original eyewitnesses mentioned.
So even our host, just by doing their own digging, is finding holes in the official story. It seems like at every turn, there's something else that casts doubt on JJ's conviction.
And all this while, JJ is still behind bars.
It's a tough reality. What started as a glimmer of hope with the CIU is turning into this feeling of despair.
It is, and it really makes you think about how complicated justice can be. It's not always straightforward.
It's less about legal stuff and more about a system that wants to protect itself, even if it means keeping an innocent man locked up.
And that leads us to a big question. What happens next? Does the CIU admit they might be wrong? Or do they stick to their guns? We'll find out in part 2. Welcome back. When we left off, things were looking up for JJ, with the new witnesses and all.
Right. It seemed like maybe, just maybe, the CIU would finally acknowledge that they messed up, that JJ was innocent.
Well, about that, after 18 months, the CIU made their decision.
Come on.
They denied JJ's appeal.
They denied it after everything.
Yeah.
Witness testimonies. What our host uncovered about Mustafa, what was their reason?
They said there wasn't enough evidence to overturn the conviction. They did mention, though, that they found proof Mustafa was on a fishing boat in Alaska when the murder happened.
Wait, what? A fishing boat in Alaska? How did they even confirm that? And remember how they didn't even bother looking into JJ's alibi witnesses?
It's strange, right? The sources don't really go into detail about how they confirmed Mustafa's alibi.
It's like they only cared about the evidence that helped their case. The stuff that supported JJ's innocence, they just ignored.
It does seem that way, doesn't it?
It feels like they were more worried about saving face than actually getting to the truth.
JJ's lawyers were furious, and rightfully so. They held a press conference, called the CIU a sham, a conviction protection racket. They were really upset about the lack of transparency, how biased the whole process seemed.
It sounds like they feel the CIU wasn't living up to its purpose at all.
And they weren't the only ones. We also hear from Dan Bibb, a former Manhattan assistant DA.
Okay.
He didn't hold back, called the CIU a joke. He said there's this ingrained mentality in the DA's office, this belief that they never get it wrong.
So there's this resistance to admitting mistakes, even when there's evidence staring them right in the face.
That's what he's suggesting.
It's disheartening. But even after the CIU's decision, JJ's lawyers still had one last shot. They filed a motion with the court, hoping a judge would hear their evidence, go around the CIU.
Mm-hmm.
So did the judge agree? Did JJ finally get a chance to present his case?
Unfortunately, no. The judge sided with the DA's office, denied the motion. It was JJ's last chance, and it was gone.
It's just heartbreaking. After years of fighting, all that evidence, and JJ's left with nothing.
It really highlights how difficult it can be to get justice, even in a system that's designed for it, especially when those in power seem to have already made up their minds.
What does this mean for other people out there, people stuck in this system who might be innocent?
It's a question that weighs heavily on all of us, isn't it? This whole thing, it's bigger than just one man's story. It's about the cracks in the system, how it can fail people.
It's a wake-up call, really. We need to pay attention to these things.
Exactly. We'll be back in a bit with our final thoughts.
We're back, and man, this whole CIU thing, it's really stuck with me. I mean, we've been through so much with JJ's case, and it's just, it's pretty disturbing.
Yeah, for me, it's JJ's own words that hit the hardest. Remember, we've read his letters from prison.
Right.
Well, after the judge denied his appeal, he wrote, "Justice has no place in my life. Hope is just a cruel joke. I am not simply innocent. I am clearly innocent. Everyone knows this."
I get chills just hearing that. To be that close, to have hope, and then have it all ripped away.
It makes you question everything. This system, it's supposed to be about justice,
Right.
But if they just ignore evidence, if it's all about protecting themselves,
Nah.
what hope do people like JJ have?
It's like with the CIU. They were supposed to help, but they seemed so skeptical of anything that challenged the original conviction.
Right, like they just wanted to protect the DI's office. And remember what Dan Bibb said, the former assistant DA.
Yeah.
He called the CIU a joke. He said they just can't admit they're wrong.
It's like they're blind to the truth. And the worst part is, JJ's not alone, right? There are others out there, just like him.
Sadly, yeah. This deep dive, it's been about so much more than just JJ.
Definitely.
It's about what happens when the system fails, the human cost of it all. It's about fighting for the truth even when it seems impossible.
So what can we do after all of this? Where do we even begin?
I think it starts with staying informed, with being engaged. These aren't just stories, they're real lives. We have to pay attention, ask questions, demand better.
I know, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. But even small things can help. Voting, supporting organizations that are fighting for change, just talking about these issues with people.
Absolutely. Every little bit counts.
JJ's story, even though we don't have a resolution, it's a wake-up call.
It is.
We can't just listen, we have to act.
It's our responsibility. Justice depends on all of us.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.